Professor Horror. Scary Stories.
Whispers from Apartment 4B. Maggie, a recent college graduate, moved to the city to start her first job. The rent prices had skyrocketed, so she was more than grateful to find an affordable one-bedroom apartment in an old building on Pine Street. The place was run down, the elevator squeaked, and the hallways were dimly lit, but it was all she could afford. Her apartment, 4A, was next to 4B, which had a slightly ajar door and looked uninhabited. On her third night, Maggie was jolted awake by whispers from the walls. Thinking it was her neighbors in 4B, she placed a glass on the wall to eavesdrop, curious about the muffled voices. They spoke incoherently, but Maggie could make out words like, "watch, soon," and 4A. The next morning, she approached Mrs. Lancaster, the elderly building superintendent. When asked about the residents of 4B, Mrs. Lancaster hesitated, then whispered that the apartment had been vacant for years after a tragedy where a young woman was stalked and killed by an unknown assailant. Disturbed, Maggie approached the office. An officer named Derek responded, offering to keep an eye on her apartment and investigate the empty 4B. That evening, he placed hidden cameras and microphones around her apartment and in the hallway. Maggie went to bed, and just like clockwork, the whispers began. Watching the feed from the van outside, Derek could hear them too, but couldn't trace the source. The cameras showed nothing unusual. Over the next few nights, the whispers grew louder and more menacing. "She's alone. Now's the time. Get her." One evening, as Maggie prepared dinner, she heard a knock. It was Mrs. Lancaster, her face pale. "Dear, I saw someone going into 4B earlier. Be cautious." Maggie's heart raced. She locked herself in and called Derek. Reviewing the footage, they noticed an anomaly. There was a slight distortion in the camera's frame facing 4B's door. Enhancing the video, they realized the terrifying truth. The door to 4B was a carefully crafted illusion, a two-way mirror. Behind it was a small space where someone had been watching Maggie all this time. Rushing upstairs, Derek and backup officers found a makeshift living space with pictures of Maggie everywhere. Taped recordings of her movements and conversations played in the background. In the corner, crouched and disheveled, was a man, Maggie's college classmate who had been infatuated with her. He was arrested, revealing that he had become obsessed with Maggie in college. When she moved to the city, he followed, discovering the perfect hideout in 4B. He planned to eventually approach Maggie, believing that in her fear and vulnerability, she would seek comfort and fall in love with him. Shaken, Maggie moved out, grateful to Derek and Mrs. Lancaster for their vigilance. The building's dark history became a grim reminder of the unseen dangers lurking in the most unexpected places.